Of course, the big news of the day will happen at 3 p.m. when we're off air, right after we go off air, when Trump announces whether or not the U.S. will stay in the Paris Climate Agreement. I'm going to have plenty to say about this throughout the show. I hope you do too. Give us a call, 202-888-99. Sorry, 808-99-205, 202-808-9925 to talk about Paris, anything else that's on your mind today. But assuming reports are true, assuming that Trump is going to take the U.S. out of the climate accord, there are reasons today to not be completely despondent about the fate of the planet. And we talked about this on the show briefly yesterday. There was a historic vote among ExxonMobil shareholders to require that company, the biggest oil company in the world, to be more transparent about what it knows about climate change, how it's affecting the planet, and how it's affecting ExxonMobil's bottom line. That's right. We now have corporate shareholders, of all people, stepping up to do something about climate change since the White House, well, they look like they've completely abandoned this issue. We'll see at 3 p.m. I want to bring on the show right now Cassady Craighill. She's the media officer at Greenpeace, and I'm guessing she has a thing or two to say about this story out of ExxonMobil, plus the stuff regarding the Paris climate deal. Cassady, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So a lot of this stuff regarding the ExxonMobil story here, a lot of this stuff stems from the fact that Exxon has, since the 1970s at least, known about the effects of climate change, how it might affect their business model, how their business might perpetuate climate change. And yet they've downplayed all this information. They've misled investors. They're the subject of a probe about misleading investors now. So Exxon has for decades known more than it's let on about climate change, while it continues to pump trillions of dollars into extracting fossil fuels out of the ground and burning them. What do you make of this development now in the story with shareholders chiming in?
Yeah, so just so your listeners know, because it's probably a little bit difficult to wrap your head around, this is really amazing and really historic that these shareholders of Exxon sort of rebelled, quite honestly, and voted against the Exxon board by 62% to force the company to acknowledge the risks of climate change and their outdated business model, which, as you said, relies on fossil fuel reserves and really locks us into a fossil fuel economy rather than a renewable energy one, which is what we need right now. So it was a major, major deal. It was unbelievably ironic that it happened on the same day that Trump allegedly, begins to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, if that is what he, in fact, decides to do. So we're living in a world right now where Exxon is actually more progressive than the White House on this issue, thanks to their shareholders, which is truly remarkable.
Yeah, that certainly is. I want to read, The Guardian had a report on this, and I just want to read from it. It says that shareholders, quote, "were showing how out of step the Trump administration had become on climate change." One shareholder who led the vote said, quote, "Trump is acting contrary to Wall Street and the world's largest investors. Climate change is a material financial risk, and shareholders want to know how companies will manage the change to a low-carbon economy." Now, I don't want to be too critical, but a lot of this may be motivated by shareholders concerned more about how climate change may affect their investments and their bottom line, and not so much about how it might end humanity itself. Should we care about those intentions, though, if indeed we're seeing positive results?
I don't think that too many people in this country would disagree that most corporations are not that moral. So I think depending on a moral backbone from Exxon is not wise. But the thing about action on climate change and the thing about the Paris Agreement is that you can put all of those motivations aside, and it is still the smart thing to do. It makes sense from a business perspective to do. If that is what is motivating these shareholders, but it creates actual real-world change, then I'm personally can reckon with that. Of course, there are plenty of other people who still understand the moral obligation that we, as a country that is most responsible for climate change, has to the rest of the world, there's plenty of those people too. So I would like to think that they're motivated by both, but absolutely it is a smart move for investors to make, to grapple and with climate change and just look at the writings on the wall, which is something that Exxon has quite honestly resisted for decades now.
You've described this shareholder vote as a shocking turn of events here. This same measure was brought to a vote last year. It garnered only 38% of support among shareholders. This year it got 62%, almost doubled its support. Has the radical nature of the Trump administration and how it is approaching these issues of climate change, I mean, Trump has once talked about how climate change was a hoax created by the Chinese. Has the ascendancy of this president motivated people who were previously on the fence about this issue to see how serious this issue is in sort of a heighten the contradictions kind of way?
Yeah, I think there's actually three things at play here. Greenpeace would like to think that we flew our thermal airship over Dallas yesterday with a message to Exxon, so we would like to think that that is what helped.
That could have been it.
But two other important things to remember is that Exxon is now under investigation by two state attorney generals, Massachusetts and New York. So that is definitely putting a spotlight on the company's climate cover-up that I think is making investors and shareholders, particularly the big firms like Vanguard, really stand up. And then I absolutely think you're right that people are realizing that we don't have a president or an administration that accepts both the science and the urgency about climate change. So there's new responsibility that's really always been there, but maybe it's just coming to light a little bit more vividly now from the business community, from governors, from mayors to really make up the difference. And I think that all of those things contributed to doubling that vote, like you said, into what was truly a historic passing of a shareholder resolution.
And we've seen this happen with other oil companies too recently. It's not just ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is the biggest company that we've seen this, but in recent months we've seen other shareholders take the same move, correct?
Yes, definitely. Like you said, Exxon is the biggest player, so that's why this one has been such a huge deal. But you're absolutely right. Other companies, Chevron being a good example, and not even just at these big annual meetings, but throughout the year have really been pressuring companies to acknowledge what the risks of climate change really are and how that impacts their business model.
Turning to the upcoming news of today, assuming that the reports over the last 2 days are true and Trump doesn't change his mind at the last minute, or whoever the last person to talk to him changes his mind, and he does withdraw the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, what's the next step for Greenpeace and other groups that care about this, considering now you have a White House that doesn't give a damn, you've got Congress controlled by Republicans who aren't going to do anything about this issue? Is it pressing shareholders to get more involved like we saw here? Is it taking battles to courts? Is it just protesting nonstop until maybe you can change the mind of Congress and, who knows, maybe even Trump?
I think it's all of those things. I mean, our voices from all different sectors just have to be louder than nationalists like Steve Bannon. I don't know what kind of self-proclaimed businessman like Trump decides to ignore the advice of the most successful business leaders in this country to listen to people like Steve Bannon and Scott Pruitt, people that I wouldn't trust to make a decision on pizza toppings. Nonetheless, the future of our country, our planet, and every human being on it. But we have to be louder on a global level than those voices. Trump's America is really not America. The majority of people in this country want action on climate change. They want to see us shift away from fossil fuels to renewable energy because they not only know that it's impacting their lives already, they know that it's an economic opportunity. And so states, cities, leading businesses in this country, people like you and me, we just have to do everything we can to move forward to that low carbon economy and low carbon communities, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. So it's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. It sends a terrible message to the rest of the world. Yeah. But there are a lot of things that we can do, and it's going to start at a local level. It's going to start individually, but it's also going to, really combine.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Cassady Craighill, Media Officer at Greenpeace. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we'll be back more with the Thom Hartmann Program, including taking some of your calls right after this.